Good morning, everybody. It's actually very difficult to start speaking in an audience like this because I'm never quite sure whether to follow the American tradition and begin with a joke or the Asian tradition to begin with an apology. So what I'll do is I'll combine the two traditions and apologize for my bad joke. But my bad joke actually is a true story. Many years ago, when I was the permanent secretary of the ministry, one of my colleagues in another ministry, permanent secretary, went to China and he called on his counterpart in China, a vice minister. And he introduced himself and he said, "I'm Mr. Tan, I'm the permanent secretary of this ministry from Singapore." So there was a young Chinese lady translator there who was going to translate what he said in Chinese, and she scratched her head for a while. And then she said, in Chinese, she said, "Oh, this guy says he's Mr. Tan, and he says that he's the eternal typist from Singapore." So permanent secretary became eternal typist. So the reason I begin with that story is that if you can have cultural misunderstanding within Singapore, which is 75% Chinese, and China, which is 100% Chinese, you realize that we have a problem in the world. And in a sense, we are moving into a completely new era of world history, which is completely different from what we've experienced in the last 200 to 300 years. And so my first, and I guess the most important point I'm going to make today, is that when you discuss issues of geopolitics, there are no experts in this world. Please do not look for somebody who can give you all the answers. By the way, with the possible exception of my guru, Steve Cohen, who's here. And I'm glad that Steve is going to speak after me because he's promised to correct everything that I said wrongly. And I thank you very much for that, Steve. But it's a serious point. And to make that point very forcefully, I can tell you that, in your world of engineering, for example, that you live in, you build bridges in a certain way 3,000 years ago. Today, fortunately, technology has improved, materials have improved, and you won't build a bridge today that is similar to the way you built a bridge 3,000 years ago. But in the field of geopolitics, you can actually argue very persuasively that everything has changed, and we now live in a completely new world. Or you can argue that nothing has changed in 3,000 years. And I'm going to illustrate that by making three arguments for why everything has changed and why nothing has changed. First, on why everything has changed. Well, three arguments again. Firstly, if you look at the world history, traditionally, whenever you have great shifts of power, and believe me, we are experiencing today far greater shifts of power than ever seen in human history, you will always see rising levels of tension between the world's greatest power and the world's greatest emerging power. That's a pattern. But today, if you look at relations between the United States and China, United States, which is the world's greatest power, and China, which is the world's greatest emerging power, amazingly enough, in the last 7 years, tensions have diminished. And indeed, both President Bush and President Hu Jintao have said on the record, relations have never been better. That's amazing. Everything has changed. And then if you look at the most immediate result of geopolitical failures, as you know, is war. And today, if you look at Europe, for example, in the continent which has produced the largest wars of the 20th century, if you look at the relations between any two European member states, not only do you have zero wars, you have zero prospect of war. And that's a huge civilizational achievement. Just imagine a world where you have zero prospect of war between India and Pakistan. So maybe if Europe has done it, everything has changed. And then, of course, if you look at the world of small states, in the old days, if you live in a small state, what you worried about was being invaded and occupied. Today, you look at India's neighbors, look at Bhutan, look at Sri Lanka, look at Nepal. They don't worry about an invasion from India because the logic has changed and we no longer invade and occupy small states. And coming from a small state like Singapore, we are very happy with this new geopolitical universe.